The night was sharp and cold over Cleveland, the kind that cut through the layers of a man's jacket and went straight to the bone. Darrell Hughes wiped the grime from his hands and stared out over the half-finished skeleton of the new office building. The lights from downtown shimmered against the icy mist rising off Lake Erie. Another long day. Another promise that tomorrow would be better. He clocked out at 8:47 p.m., his steel-toed boots echoing on the pavement. The other guys were already gone. Eddie Turner, his co-worker and closest friend, had said, "Come on, man, let's grab a bite before heading home." Darrell hesitated. Linda would be waiting. But he agreed. It was payday after all. The diner sat off Detroit Avenue, a neon-lit box glowing red and white against the darkness. Inside, the smell of fried onions and burnt coffee wrapped around them like an old blanket. A jukebox played soft rock from the corner booth. Eddie ordered black coffee. Darrell went for a slice of pie and a glass of milk. "So, you gonna take that new job over in Parma?" Eddie asked, stirring his coffee. "Thinking about it," Darrell replied. "Better pay, longer hours." "Linda's worried I'll work myself into the ground." Eddie chuckled. "You already did that years ago." They laughed, but it didn't last. The talk drifted toward layoffs, union dues, and rumors that someone in management was skimming money off the books. Darrell's brow furrowed. "I heard Frank Malloy's mixed up in something shady. Guys missing pay. Materials unaccounted for." Eddie lowered his voice. "Don't say that too loud. Frank's got friends." When the clock hit 9:30, Darrell stood, slipping on his worn leather jacket. "Gotta head home before Linda thinks I ran off with the waitress." He tossed a few bills on the counter and gave Eddie a nod. "See you Monday." "Yeah," Eddie said quietly. "See you then." Outside, the air bit harder. Snowflakes drifted down, landing on the brim of Darrell's cap. He zipped his jacket and crossed the empty lot toward his old Chevy truck. The headlights flickered once before turning steady. From the diner window, Eddie watched him pull away, the taillights fading into the white haze. It was the last time anyone saw Darrell Hughes alive. By morning, his truck was found abandoned near the Cuyahoga River, door ajar, keys still in the ignition. No sign of struggle, no footprints in the snow, just silence. In the days that followed, the city buzzed with rumors. Some said he ran away, others whispered of debts or revenge. Linda refused to believe any of it. He wouldn't leave Maggie, she told the police through tears. He loved his family too much. Detectives opened a missing persons case, but evidence was scarce, and Cleveland was a city that learned to bury its questions deep. Still, one truth would not stay quiet forever. Before we uncover what really happened to Darrell Hughes, make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because this story is only beginning. Detective Martha Collins had seen her share of disappearances, but something about Darrell Hughes stayed with her. Maybe it was his daughter's photograph, taped crookedly to the report folder. Maybe it was the way his wife, Linda, refused to give up. Either way, this wasn't just another case file. It was a wound that refused to close. The morning after Darrell vanished, the Cleveland Police Department buzzed with tension. The news spread fast. Construction worker missing. Truck found near the Cuyahoga. Collins stood by the window, watching the grey river roll past in the distance. It was a cold January day, the kind that made the city feel heavier. She visited the diner first. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, said Darrell had been in good spirits. He left around 9:30, same as always. Nothing strange, far as I saw. Collins asked about Eddie Turner, and the woman hesitated. He looked nervous that night, kept checking the door. At the Hughes home, Linda met her at the door with a trembling hand. The living room smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke. On the mantel, a wedding photo, Darrell in his work clothes, smiling like a man who believed life would hold together. "Did he mention trouble at work?" Collins asked gently. Linda shook her head. "He just said things were getting tense. The company was behind on pay, but Darrell never ran from problems, Detective." Her voice broke. "He's a good man." Collins nodded, scanning the room. The signs of ordinary life were everywhere. Boots by the door, half-read newspaper on the table. But absence lingered like a shadow. At the construction site, the crew gathered near a half-built wall, their breath turning to mist in the cold. Frank Malloy, the foreman, met Collins with a firm handshake and a guarded smile. "Darrell was one of my best," he said. "Quiet, dependable. I don't know what happened." "Any disputes, arguments on the job?" Collins asked. Malloy's eyes flickered. "Not that I recall. Everyone liked Darrell, but one worker muttered under his breath. Not everyone." When Collins turned, he pretended to light a cigarette. By evening, Eddie Turner was brought in for questioning. His hands trembled as he sipped from a paper cup. "You were the last to see him," Collins said. "Yeah," Eddie admitted. "We had dinner, talked a bit, then he left. That's all." "Did you two argue?" "No, ma'am. Darrell was fine. Maybe tired, that's it." But his voice cracked slightly and Collins caught it. "You sure about that, Eddie?" He swallowed hard. "Yeah. Positive." The report went in. Missing person, last seen near the diner, truck recovered, no signs of foul play. But Collins didn't believe in coincidences. Something about the case felt wrong. Too clean, too quick. That night, as the city lights reflected off the frozen river, she closed her notebook and whispered to herself, "People don't just vanish. Not here." She didn't yet know it, but Cleveland was about to reveal just how far some people would go to keep their secrets buried. By the end of that first week, Cleveland was talking. In the Union Hall, at corner bars, in the pews after Sunday service, everyone had a theory about what happened to Darrell Hughes. Some said he'd run off to escape debt. Others swore he'd found out something he shouldn't have. But no one knew for sure, and that uncertainty settled over the community like the lake's winter fog. Detective Martha Collins heard the whispers too. Every time she walked into a diner or gas station, conversation stopped mid-sentence. People trusted her, but they also feared what she might uncover. Cleveland in 1990 wasn't a place that liked questions, not when paychecks were thin and everyone owed someone something. At the police precinct, Collins spread the case file across her desk. The map of the city was dotted with red pins. Darrell's house, the diner, the construction site, the river. Too close together, too neat. She sipped cold coffee and studied the pattern, searching for a thread. That afternoon, she met Darrell's brother, Ray Hughes, at a small repair shop he owned near Lorraine Avenue. Ray was older, harder around the eyes. "Darrell wasn't perfect," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "But he was steady, he worked his tail off. You think he just up and left?" "I don't," Collins replied. "But I need more than that." Ray leaned against the counter. "Then you should look at his foreman. Frank Malloy's been pushing guys too hard, cutting corners. Darrell told me once he caught someone skimming money off materials." "Did he say who?" "No, just said it stank. He planned to talk to the union rep, maybe go to the cops." That line stayed with her. It wasn't motive yet, but it was the first real crack in the silence. Meanwhile, the neighborhood carried on as if nothing had happened. Kids went to school. The mills groaned through another shift and the snow turned gray in the gutters. But beneath the surface, tension grew. In bars along West 25th, men lowered their voices when Darrell's name came up. One of them told Collins quietly, "He knew too much. You don't poke around money that isn't yours." Eddie Turner had stopped showing up at work. His neighbors said he was keeping to himself, drinking more than usual. When Collins called his home, the line rang until it clicked to static. She wrote it down and underlined it twice. Late that night, she drove past the construction site. The floodlights cast long shadows over the skeletal frame of the building. A sign read, "Malloy Construction, Building the Future of Cleveland." Collins stared at it for a long time. Then at the frozen mud where Darrell once stood working. The city felt heavy, as if holding its breath. In her report that night, she wrote, "Community growing restless. Rumors of corruption within Malloy Construction." Darrell may have discovered something significant before his disappearance. Then she paused, pen hovering over the paper, and added a final line. "Someone in this town knows what happened. They just don't want to talk." The Hughes house on West 98th Street used to feel alive, warm with laughter, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings, the hum of Darrell's old radio by the window. Now it was quiet. The curtains stayed closed, and the clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. Linda Hughes sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by unopened bills. Each envelope carried a different shade of bad news. The construction company had stopped sending checks owed to Darrell. The union promised to look into it, but weeks passed with no answers. Cleveland was good at forgetting, and Linda could feel it happening already. Her daughter, Maggie, only 8 years old, shuffled into the room, clutching a worn teddy bear. "Mom, did Daddy call yet?" she asked softly. Linda forced a smile that hurt to hold. "Not yet, baby. Maybe today." But she knew that phone wouldn't ring. Detective Martha Collins stopped by later that afternoon. The cold followed her in, carrying the scent of the river. She looked tired, like the case was clawing at her too. "Mrs. Hughes," she said, removing her hat, "I just wanted to check in. We're still working every angle." Linda studied her face. "Are you really? Because it feels like everyone's already moved on." Collins hesitated. I'm not moving on. I can't promise results, but I won't drop it. Tears filled Linda's eyes, but she nodded. I just need to know what happened. He wouldn't leave us. Daryl wasn't that kind of man. They talked quietly while the wind howled outside. Collins asked about Daryl's habits, his friends, any recent tension. Linda mentioned the stress at work, the rumors about missing funds, the long hours. He said something about talking to the foreman. I told him to be careful. He laughed and said, "What's the worst that could happen?" I wish I'd made him stay home that night. When Collins left, she promised to keep in touch. But Linda had learned that promises were easy. Answers were not. As days turned into weeks, people stopped visiting. The casseroles stopped coming. Even the neighbors, once kind, began avoiding eye contact. The city moved on with its daily grind, factories smoking, trains howling through the cold nights, while Linda and Maggie waited in silence. One evening, Ray Hughes knocked on the door. His face was drawn, his hands rough from work. "Any news?" he asked. "Nothing," Linda said, voice barely above a whisper. Ray sat beside her, the old floor creaking beneath his boots. "I talked to some of the guys. They're scared, Lynn. Whatever Daryl found out, it scared the hell out of them." Linda looked up sharply. "Then tell the police." "They won't talk," Ray replied. "They think the company's got someone watching." For the first time, fear crept into her grief. Daryl's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. That night, as snow began to fall again over Cleveland, Linda stood by the window, watching the empty streetlights flicker. Somewhere out there, the truth was buried deep, but she swore to herself she'd keep digging until she found it. By February, the case of Daryl Hughes had gone cold. The flyers with his face were curling on telephone poles, the ink fading under sleet and wind. People still talked, but less now, whispers drowned out by the sound of factory whistles and snowplows scraping the frozen streets. Detective Martha Collins sat alone in her office, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The board behind her was covered in photos. Daryl's truck, the diner, the muddy bank of the Cuyahoga River. Every lead she had followed seemed to die the same way, quietly, without warning. That morning, she met with the police chief. "Collins," he said, rubbing his temple, "it's been 6 weeks. No new evidence, no witnesses. We can't keep throwing hours at this." Her jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, we still don't know what happened to him," he sighed. "Sometimes people disappear. It's not always a crime." Collins leaned forward. "You believe that?" He didn't answer. She left his office angry, but not surprised. Cleveland had seen too many cases like this. Workers who went missing, stories that slipped through the cracks. The city swallowed people whole, and the system learned to move on. Later that day, she drove out to question Eddie Turner again. His house looked worse than before, blinds drawn, beer cans scattered on the porch. He opened the door slowly, eyes bloodshot. "I told you everything," he muttered. "I don't think you did," Collins said. "You knew Daryl better than anyone. You said he was fine that night, but you keep looking like a man carrying something heavy." Eddie exhaled, rubbing his face. "You ever think maybe I just feel guilty? I should have made him stay. He was worried about something at work. Frank, the money. I told him to drop it. That's all I got, Detective." She studied him. "You sure that's all?" His eyes darted to the floor. "Yeah, that's all." Back at the station, her notes piled higher. Witnesses began retracting statements, suddenly remembering less. The company lawyer from Malloy Construction called to complain about harassment. Collins knew that kind of call wasn't random. It was a warning. Meanwhile, Linda Hughes sat at her kitchen table reading yet another letter from the department. Investigation ongoing. The same words as before. She tore the paper in half and whispered, "Ongoing doesn't mean alive." Her brother-in-law, Ray, arrived later with a shoebox full of papers. "Found these in Daryl's locker at the shop," he said. Inside were pay stubs, time cards, and a few photographs. Collins flipped through them that evening, something catching her eye. A handwritten note on the back of a receipt. "Meeting by the river, Tuesday night." It was dated the day Daryl disappeared. Collins stared at it, heart pounding. It wasn't much, but it was something. A single thread left in a web of silence. She didn't know where it would lead, only that she couldn't stop now. As the snow fell outside the precinct windows, she pinned the note to the board and whispered, "You're still out there, Daryl, and I'm not done yet." 10 years had passed since the night Daryl Hughes disappeared, and Cleveland had changed in ways that felt both fast and slow. The factories that once filled the skyline were now skeletons of rust and glass, and the steady hum of machinery had given way to silence. On West 98th Street, the Hughes house still stood, smaller somehow, weathered by time and memory. Maggie Hughes, now 20, walked through the front door carrying a stack of college books. Her mother, Linda, had grown quieter over the years, her voice softer, her movements slower, but she still kept Daryl's photograph on the mantel, his smile frozen in a moment that refused to fade. "Got that journalism project due next week?" Maggie said, setting her books down. "They want something personal, something real." Linda looked up from her cup of tea. "You've got plenty of stories around here." Maggie hesitated. "I was thinking about Dad." The room fell still. The old clock ticked once, twice. "Maybe it's time someone looked into it again," Maggie continued. "The case file's still open, right?" Linda's eyes filled with worry. "Sweetheart, the police did everything they could." "Did they?" Maggie asked. "Because it sure doesn't look like it." Later that night, Maggie sat at her desk under a flickering lamp, scrolling through archived news articles. Most were brief, buried beneath headlines about politics and sports. Construction worker missing, no leads. Family pleads for answers. It felt wrong how easily the story had been forgotten. She found the name she'd seen in the reports. Detective Martha Collins. A few quick searches led her to a phone number listed under a small apartment in Lakewood. It took Maggie 3 tries to build the courage to call. "Hello?" The voice was rough, older now, but unmistakably sharp. "Detective Collins? My name's Maggie Hughes." A pause. "Daryl's daughter?" "Yes. I wanted to talk about my father." "About the case." There was a sigh on the other end. "That case died a long time ago, kid. Then maybe it's time to bring it back." They met the next day in a small diner off Detroit Avenue, the same one where Daryl was last seen. Collins looked tired, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes heavy but alert. "I read everything you wrote back then," Maggie said. "You were the only one who seemed to care." Collins stirred her coffee. "Caring doesn't always get you answers. I chased that case for months, lost sleep, lost friends. In the end, the department wanted it gone." "Why?" Maggie pressed. "Because someone with power wanted it buried." Maggie leaned forward. "Then maybe we dig it up." Collins studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. "How you've got his stubbornness, that's for sure. All right, I'll tell you what I know, but once we start, there's no stopping." Maggie smiled faintly. "Good. I'm not planning to stop." Outside, the sky hung low and grey over the lake. For the first time in years, the story of Daryl Hughes began to stir again, quietly like something waking from a long, uneasy sleep. The next week, Maggie sat cross-legged on the floor of her mother's attic, surrounded by boxes marked DH. Dust floated in the sunlight like ghosts. She had come looking for old photographs, but found something far more interesting. An old metal lunchbox, dented and rusted, tucked behind a stack of newspapers. Inside were payslips, a few black and white photos from the job site, and a folded letter sealed in an envelope with Daryl's handwriting on the front. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The letter was addressed to her mother but had never been mailed. "Lynn," it began, "if anything happens to me, it's because I found something I shouldn't have. Malloy's been cooking numbers. Whole shipment's missing. Eddie knows too, but he's scared. Don't trust anyone from the site." Maggie sat frozen, reading the lines over and over until the ink blurred with tears. For 10 years, the answer had been sitting right here, hidden above their heads. That night she drove to a payphone and called Detective Collins. "I found something," she said. "What kind of something?" "A letter. My dad wrote it before he disappeared. He names Frank Malloy." There was a pause. "You still have it?" "Yes. Don't tell anyone else. Meet me tomorrow." The next afternoon, they met at the edge of the lake, near the old pier where Collins liked to think. Maggie handed her the letter carefully. Collins read it twice, jaw tightening. "I knew it," she muttered. "Malloy's name kept coming up, but we never had proof." "So what do we do?" Maggie asked. Collins folded the letter. "We find Eddie Turner. If your dad trusted him, he might still be holding something back." It took 2 days to track him down. Eddie lived in a trailer park outside Palmer, a place where the wind rattled tin walls and dogs barked without reason. When Maggie and Collins knocked, he opened the door slowly, his eyes red and tired. "Maggie Hughes," he said softly, "you look just like your dad." She didn't smile. "Then tell me what happened to him." Eddie hesitated, glancing at Collins. "You still with the police?" "Not anymore," she replied. "Just looking for the truth." He motioned for them to sit. "Daryl was good, honest. Too honest for the people he worked for. He found out Malloy and some union guys were moving stolen materials, selling them off-site. Said he was going to blow the whistle. Eddie took a long breath. I told him not to. Said those men didn't play fair. Next thing I knew, he was gone. Did you see him that night? Collins asked. Yeah. He left the diner, same as always. But I saw Malloy's car near the river later. Black Lincoln, lights off. I didn't say a word back then. I was scared. Maggie leaned forward. Scared of who? Eddie's voice broke. All of them. You don't understand how deep it went. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the trailer park. Collins looked at Maggie. You were right, she said quietly. Your father didn't just disappear. He was silenced. And for the first time, Maggie realized the danger wasn't buried in the past. It was still alive, waiting. The next morning, Maggie sat at the library with her laptop open, scrolling through Cleveland's public business archives. Malloy Construction still existed, bigger now with contracts across Ohio, but in 1990 there was a gap in its financial records. A whole quarter of missing data. It was as if someone had erased part of the company's history. She cross-checked payroll files, union reports, and local news from that year. Names appeared and reappeared. Frank Malloy, 2 city inspectors, and a man named Robert Klein, a lawyer with connections to several construction bids. Maggie's pulse quickened. It wasn't just about money. It was about power and who controlled it. She printed everything and called Collins. I think my father stumbled onto a cover-up. Not just stolen materials, contracts, bribes, maybe even city money. Collins sounded grim. I've seen it before. Malloy didn't act alone. We're dealing with people who could buy silence. Then we make noise, Maggie said. Later that afternoon, they returned to Eddie's trailer. He looked weaker, more anxious than before, like the memories themselves were wearing him down. Maggie spread the documents across the table. Does any of this look familiar? She asked. Eddie's eyes scanned the pages, stopping at a signature. That's Klein. He was Malloy's lawyer back then. They met at the river lot sometimes. Friday nights after work. Said it was off the books. I didn't ask questions. What happened the night my dad disappeared? Eddie rubbed his temples. I heard voices down by the docks. Darrell's and another man's. Then shouting. I started walking that way, but someone yelled at me to leave. I ran. Collins leaned forward. Who yelled? I couldn't see. But I'll never forget the sound of a car door slamming. The same Black Lincoln I told you about. For a long moment, no one spoke. Maggie felt her stomach twist. Every piece of evidence pointed to Malloy, but it was still just a story without proof. When they left, the sky was darkening. The air smelled of rain and steel, like the city itself was holding its breath. Maggie looked at Collins. If all of this is true, we're going up against powerful people. Collins gave a tired smile. Then we hit them where they least expect it. Records, witnesses, paper trails. Corruption leaves fingerprints. Back home, Maggie began documenting everything for her journalism project. Names, dates, statements. She recorded a brief interview with Eddie, his voice shaking but honest. Your dad was trying to make things right, he said on tape. He found something ugly, he died for it. She played the recording back several times, each word heavier than the last. It wasn't just an assignment anymore, it was evidence. Before going to bed, she tucked the letter and the USB drive of her recordings under her pillow. For the first time, she felt close to her father. Not in memory, but in mission. He had chased the truth, and now she was doing the same. What she didn't know was that someone else was already watching her, waiting for her next move. Maggie woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was Collins. We've got a problem, the detective said. Her voice clipped. Eddie's place got broken into last night. He's fine, but someone tore the place apart. They were looking for something. Maggie's stomach sank. You think it's connected to what we found? I don't think. I know. Collins exhaled through the line. You still have your copy of the recordings? Yes. Hidden. Good. Don't tell anyone where. By the time Maggie arrived at the trailer park, police cars lined the gravel road. Eddie sat on the steps, wrapped in a blanket, eyes hollow. They knew exactly where to look, he muttered. Didn't take the TV, didn't touch my wallet, just the files. Maggie sat beside him. Who would do this? He looked up, his voice shaking. You don't get it, kid. Those men never stopped watching. You stir the dirt, they smell it. Collins stepped closer. We'll find out who did this, but you both need to be careful. That night, Maggie returned home uneasy. The house was dark, her mother asleep upstairs. She went to her room and froze. Her desk drawers were open, her laptop gone. Panic rose in her chest. She ran to the closet, pulled up the loose floorboard where she had hidden her father's letter and the USB drive. Both were still there. Relief and fear tangled in her throat. Someone had been inside, and they hadn't come for money. She called Collins immediately. "They took my laptop." "Then you're not safe there," Collins replied. "Pack a bag and meet me downtown in an hour. We'll figure out where to go." As Maggie drove through the empty Cleveland streets, her headlights sliced through the fog rolling off the river. Every shadow felt like it was moving. She gripped the wheel tighter, replaying her father's words in her head. Don't trust anyone from the sight. At a small diner near the highway, Collins was waiting with 2 coffees. She looked tense but calm. "You're being watched now," she said quietly. "This isn't just a cold case anymore. Someone out there is scared of what you'll uncover." Maggie leaned forward. "Then they should be." Collins gave a faint smile. "I like your spirit, but you need to be smart. I've seen how this city buries things. Once they start digging into you, they won't stop until you back down." "I'm not backing down," Maggie said. "They already took my dad. I'm not letting them take the truth, too." Collins nodded slowly, her eyes sharp with a mix of pride and worry. "Then we play it right. Tomorrow I'll reopen the case unofficially. We'll start with the old evidence logs, see what's missing and who signed it out." Outside, the diner lights flickered as a car idled across the street, its engine humming low. Maggie didn't notice, but Collins did. She kept her voice steady. "Stay close to me from now on," she said. "Cleveland's about to wake up some ghosts." The next morning, the city was blanketed in grey. Cleveland felt muted, as if even the air knew something was stirring beneath the surface. Collins and Maggie met early at the old police archives downtown, a squat concrete building that smelled of dust and history. Collins flashed her retired badge at the clerk, an old friend who didn't ask too many questions. Inside, rows of cardboard boxes lined the shelves, decades of forgotten cases. Collins moved with purpose, scanning faded labels until she stopped at one marked Hughes Darrell, 1990. She lifted it carefully, brushing away a layer of grime. "This is it," she said. Maggie leaned closer. "What are we looking for exactly?" "Something that shouldn't be here," Collins replied, "or something that should have been but isn't." They opened the box. Inside were the original reports, photos of Darrell's truck, and a handful of cassette tapes labeled interview recordings. Collins frowned. These weren't logged in the digital system. They should have been transferred years ago. She slid one into an old tape player from a supply closet. Static filled the air, followed by muffled voices. It was her own voice, younger, questioning a witness. Then another man's, Frank Malloy. "Mr. Malloy," the younger Collins said on tape, "did you see Mr. Hughes the night he disappeared?" Malloy's voice came through calm and smooth. "No, ma'am. I left the site early that day. Haven't seen him since." But in the background, faintly, another sound emerged, a second male voice, tense and angry. Maggie leaned forward. "Wait, that's my dad." Collins froze. The tape hissed, then Darrell's voice became clearer. "Frank, you think I don't see what's going on. You're robbing these men blind." Then a crash, a chair scraping. Malloy shouted something inaudible. The recording ended abruptly. Maggie's eyes widened. "That's it. That's proof he confronted him." Collins rewound it, listening again, her hands trembling slightly. "This was never filed," she muttered. "Someone removed it from the official evidence list, probably to protect Malloy." "Can we use it?" Maggie asked. Collins looked up. "We can, but it's not enough on its own. It's motive, not confession. Still, this changes everything." They copied the recording onto a flash drive and sealed the tape back in the box. As they left the archives, Collins couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. The clerk gave a polite nod, but his eyes followed them too long. Outside, the cold air bit at their faces. In the car, Maggie played the recording again through her phone speaker. Her father's voice filled the silence, raw and defiant. It hit her like a wave. The man she barely remembered was suddenly real again. "He wasn't afraid," she whispered. Collins nodded. "No, but courage like that gets people killed in this city." Maggie stared out at the skyline, a mix of fear and determination tightening her chest. "Then let's finish what he started." Collins gripped the steering wheel. "We will. But the people we're about to cross, they've been covering this up for 30 years. She pulled into traffic, the tape still playing faintly. Darrell Hughes's final words echoing like a ghost refusing to fade. By the time the news spread, the tape had already begun to circulate. A local journalist Maggie trusted uploaded a short clip. The muffled argument between Darrell Hughes and Frank Malloy, and within hours, Cleveland was talking again. For the first time in decades, Darrell's name was back on the airwaves. Detective Martha Collins sat in her apartment, watching the coverage. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Old colleagues, reporters, even the police union. Most of them had the same question: where did that tape come from? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked out over the frozen streets and whispered, "It's about time." Maggie met her later that night at a diner, the same one her father had walked out of 30 years earlier. "It's blowing up," she said, sliding her phone across the table. "Everyone's sharing it." Collins frowned. "It's good the truth's coming out, but this kind of attention draws the wrong eyes too." "I'm not afraid," Maggie replied. "I want them to know I'm not backing down." Collins leaned back, studying her. "You sound like your father." Maggie smiled faintly. "That's the goal." As they spoke, a man approached their booth. He was older, heavy-set, with a face Collins recognized instantly. Captain Robert Hanlon, retired Cleveland PD, the last person she wanted to see. "Collins," he said, voice low. "We need to talk." She tensed. "We said everything that needed saying years ago." "Not this." He looked at Maggie. "You're stirring up ghosts you don't understand. The department buried that case for a reason." Maggie's voice cut through the silence. "To protect Frank Malloy." Hanlon's jaw tightened. "You don't know how things worked back then. The unions, the city contracts, it was all connected. You start pulling threads, the whole place unravels." "That's the idea," Collins said coldly. Hanlon hesitated, then sighed. Malloy wasn't the only one involved. He had people behind him, people still in power. "You think that tape will change anything? It'll just make you a target." He turned to leave, but Maggie stopped him. "Why did you protect him?" Hanlon paused at the door. "Because some fights aren't worth surviving," he said, and walked out. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the diner filled the silence. Finally, Maggie said, "He's scared." "Good," Collins replied. "Fear means we're getting close." Later that night, Maggie sat in her car outside the old Malloy construction office, watching the dark windows. Inside those walls were decades of secrets, contracts, payments, cover-ups. She thought about her father's voice on the tape, about how alive he had sounded even in anger. Collins called from her car down the street. "You sure you're ready for this?" Maggie exhaled slowly. "I've been ready my whole life." The cold wind swept off the river as they sat in silence. Two women chasing justice in a city that had long forgotten what the word meant. For the first time, Maggie understood why her father hadn't backed down, and why she couldn't either. The truth wasn't just buried in Cleveland's past. It was waiting to be dug up, one name at a time. 2 weeks later, the city woke to headlines that made Cleveland stop and stare. Cold case reopened. New evidence in 1990. Disappearance of construction worker. The tape had reached the right ears and pressure mounted fast. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse, microphones raised, waiting for a name. Detective Martha Collins, now working as a consultant, stood beside Maggie in the press crowd. "They're finally doing it," she murmured. "After 30 years. Maggie's hands were cold, despite the sun. "Do you think it'll stick?" "It will if the system still remembers what justice looks like." At that moment, the courthouse doors opened. 2 officers led a man in handcuffs down the steps, Frank Malloy. His once polished hair was white now, but his stride was steady, defiant. Cameras flashed and questions flew from every direction. "Mr. Malloy, did you kill Darrell Hughes? Were you protected by the city?" Malloy's lips tightened. No comment. Collins watched him closely. "He's aged, but the arrogance is still there," she said. Maggie stared, speechless. "That's him," she whispered. "The man my father trusted." The charges read like the past resurfacing. Obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, conspiracy. The DNA found on Darrell's old work jacket, preserved all these years in a forgotten evidence locker, matched Frank Malloy's profile exactly. It was the break the case had been waiting for. Inside the precinct, Collins spoke quietly with the lead investigator. "I had that jacket tested again myself. It sat in a storage bin for 3 decades. Makes you wonder what else was left behind." The man nodded. "You were right all along." Across town, the news hit like thunder. Former co-workers called into radio shows, sharing memories and guilt. Some claimed they always suspected Malloy. Others swore he was framed. The truth, finally, was dragging every lie into the light. That night, Maggie visited her mother. Linda sat by the living room window, watching the reports replay on TV. Malloy's face filled the screen as the anchor said, "After 35 years, justice may finally be within reach." Linda turned to her daughter, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Maggie. You and that detective. You brought him back." Maggie shook her head softly. "No, Mom, we just listened to him." Dad's voice did the rest. The next morning, Collins and Maggie sat in the back of the courtroom. Malloy was led to the defense table, avoiding their gaze. When the judge asked how he pleaded, Malloy's lawyer leaned close and whispered something. Then Malloy spoke, his voice gravelly but steady. "Not guilty." The room erupted with noise, reporters, whispers, flashes of cameras. Maggie's heart pounded, but Collins didn't flinch. "Let him say what he wants," she said. "The evidence will talk louder." Outside, snow began to fall, slow, heavy, endless. Maggie breathed in the cold air and looked toward the courthouse steps where her father's story had finally been heard. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, Cleveland was paying attention. Frank Malloy sat across the interrogation table, his hands cuffed and his face drained of color. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, a low hum filling the silence. Detective Martha Collins stood on one side, the new lead investigator beside her. On the table sat a small recorder, its red light blinking. "You've had 30 years to think about this, Frank," Collins said. "Now's your chance to tell the truth." Malloy stared at the table, jaw tight. "You think you know what happened. You don't. Then explain it," she replied. He exhaled slowly, his voice trembling as if age had finally broken through his pride. "Daryl wasn't supposed to die. He came at me that night, shouting about stolen money, about going to the union. Said he'd blow the whole thing open. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen." "What happened next?" Collins asked. Malloy's eyes flickered upward. "He swung first. I pushed him. He hit the ground hard, too hard. I panicked. There was blood." His voice cracked. "I didn't mean to kill him." The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Collins's pen hovered over her notepad. "You dumped his body." Malloy nodded weakly. "The river. It was freezing that night. I called a friend on the force, told him it was an accident, begged him to make it disappear. He did." The investigator leaned forward. "Who was it?" Malloy hesitated. "Captain Hanlon. He helped me clean it up. Said the department couldn't afford another scandal. He took the evidence, the tapes, everything." Collins' hands tightened around her folder. "You let a man's family suffer for 3 decades because it was easier than telling the truth." Malloy looked at her with watery eyes. "You don't understand. If I'd talked, they would have buried me too. The city runs on secrets." Meanwhile, outside the station, reporters crowded around Maggie Hughes. She waited quietly, refusing to speak to cameras. She only wanted one thing, to look Malloy in the eyes when he finally said her father's name. When Collins emerged from the interrogation room, she found Maggie waiting in the hallway. "He confessed," Collins said softly. Maggie's breath caught. He admitted it. "All of it. Your father was right about everything." Tears welled in Maggie's eyes, but she didn't cry. "What happens now?" "He'll face trial. The truth's finally on record. No more silence." Maggie nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "My dad didn't die for nothing." That night, the city buzzed again with news of the confession. For the first time, Daryl Hughes wasn't just a missing name on an old case file. He was a man whose story had finally been told. In her small apartment, Collins poured herself a drink and stared at the case folder one last time. She thought of the snow-covered river, of a man who tried to do the right thing and paid the price for it. Justice had taken 30 years to find its way back to Cleveland, but it had arrived quiet and heavy, carried on the voices of those who refused to forget. Spring arrived slowly in Cleveland that year. The snow melted from the edges of the Cuyahoga River, revealing its dark waters again, cold, endless, and quiet. For the first time in decades, the police search unit returned to the riverbank with purpose. Following Malloy's confession, divers had been combing the depths for days. On the 4th morning, Collins received the call. "We found him," the voice said simply. Maggie stood at the edge of the river when they brought the remains ashore. Wrapped carefully, labeled, and treated with reverence, what was left of Daryl Hughes finally came home. Collins stood beside her in silence. The air smelled faintly of iron and wet earth. "He never made it far," Collins murmured. "All these years and he was right here." Maggie's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "He was trying to do the right thing," she said softly, "and they buried him for it." The city of Cleveland didn't move fast, but it remembered. News crews filled the streets again, this time not for scandal but for closure. "Remains identified. Justice for Darrell Hughes," read the headlines. People who had once whispered about the case now spoke his name with respect. A week later, the Hughes family held a small memorial by the river. The crowd was quiet, former co-workers, old neighbors, even a few retired officers. Linda stood at the front, her hands trembling as she held the folded flag the department had sent. "He wasn't a hero to them back then," she said, "but he was to us every day." When it was Maggie's turn to speak, she looked out at the faces before her. "My father believed in honesty, even when it cost him everything. He wasn't just a construction worker. He was a man who refused to be silent. And now, finally, neither will we." The applause that followed was soft, almost reverent. After the service, Collins lingered near the river, her coat pulled tight against the wind. Maggie joined her quietly. "You're leaving Cleveland, aren't you?" she asked. Collins smiled faintly. "Yeah, this case, it took a lot out of me, but I wanted to see it through." "You did more than that," Maggie said. "You gave us back our truth." They stood together for a moment, watching the water move under the bridge. For both of them, the river no longer felt like a place of loss. It was a boundary finally crossed. That evening, Maggie uploaded the final cut of her documentary project. It opened with her father's voice from the recovered tape, followed by images of the city, the factory lots, and the family that had waited 3 decades for justice. She titled it, "The Weight of Silence." As the video processed, she sat back, exhausted but at peace. Outside, the lights of Cleveland glimmered against the river. For the first time in her life, she felt her father's presence not as a memory, but as a quiet strength that would never fade. Justice, though late, had finally found its way home. Years later, Cleveland moved forward, but for the Hughes family, time had taken on a different rhythm. The city's skyline was changing again, new buildings rising where old factories once stood, the hum of life returning to the streets. Yet along the banks of the Cuyahoga River, the past still whispered. Maggie Hughes walked the familiar path one crisp autumn morning, her coat pulled tight against the wind. In her hand she carried a single photograph, her father smiling, arm around her mother, dirt on his clothes and hope in his eyes. She stopped at the small memorial plaque by the river, engraved with his name, Darrell Hughes, 1956-1990, never forgotten. Her daughter, a curious 5-year-old with the same dark eyes as her grandfather, tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, is this where Grandpa worked?" Maggie smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart, this is where he stood for what was right." They knelt together, placing a small bouquet of wildflowers near the plaque. The river shimmered under the morning light, calm and unhurried. Maggie took a deep breath, feeling the ache that had once been grief transform into something quieter, gratitude, maybe even pride. After the truth came out, life had not returned to normal. It had simply become something new. Frank Malloy spent the rest of his life in prison. The department issued a formal apology for its role in the cover-up, and Detective Martha Collins, before retiring, received the recognition she had long been denied. Maggie, now an investigative journalist, dedicated her career to uncovering stories like her father's, voices lost in silence, names buried under bureaucracy and neglect. Her documentary, The Weight of Silence, went on to win awards, but what mattered most was the letters she received from people who saw themselves in her story. One of them read, "Your father's courage gave me the strength to tell the truth." At home, Linda Hughes kept her husband's photo by the window. Her hair was white now, her movements slower, but her spirit remained steady. Sometimes she'd watch the news and see Maggie on screen, her voice calm, strong, resolute. He'd be proud, she would whisper to the empty room. That evening, Maggie returned home, her daughter asleep in the back seat. She parked the car and sat quietly for a moment, looking out at the neighborhood lights flickering like small promises. The years had taken much, but they had given her purpose. Before heading inside, she opened her notebook and wrote a single line, "Truth is patient. It waits until someone is brave enough to find it." Then she smiled faintly, glancing at the night sky. Somewhere in that vast silence, she liked to believe her father was still watching, steady, unyielding, proud. As the wind carried across the dark river, the story of Darrell Hughes no longer belonged to Cleveland's cold past. It had become something larger, a reminder that even the quietest voices can echo for generations, and as the credits of his story faded, Maggie's voice lingered one last time. Thank you for watching. If you believe truth still matters, stay with us and keep listening.